All right, good evening, Green Hill Church. It's great to have you here for midweek. If you are joining us online through greenhillchurch.com or on Facebook or YouTube, thank you for joining us tonight. We do have a few folks in the building tonight. We are on campus and online, and so we appreciate those that are in the audience tonight as well. For midweek this week, we are going to continue in our Truth Talks. If you're new to Green Hill Church, or maybe you're not familiar with what Truth Talks are, we do a Truth Talk once a quarter. And those Truth Talks, the purpose of those are to speak into our next generation of students and parents and kids about relevant topics. And so far this year, we have done a roundtable on parenting with a bunch of our next-gen parents. We had one on gender and gender identity. And the last one that we did online through Zoom with Jason Thatcher on AI and technology. And tonight we're excited to have our guest here with us, and Dan's going to introduce her in just a second. But tonight's topic is mental health, and so we had this planned on the calendar a year in advance, but it's just providential that it's going to be mental health tonight, because with everything that's gone on in our world in the last 3 months, I think there couldn't be a more appropriate truth talk than to speak about mental health tonight. And so we're going to do this in an interview format. I'm going to pray here in just a minute, then I'm going to turn it over to Dan Darling. Dan is one of our elders here at the church, and he is going to be communicating with our guests tonight and asking questions back and forth using an interview format. And so I hope that you will join in tonight. One way that you can participate is through questions and discussions online. And I will be on that discussion board with you. So we're going to have a time at the end tonight to have questions from the audience, both here live on campus, but then also online. And so if you would like to ask a question of Dan or our guest tonight, just put that into the comments, and then I'll compile that list, and we will ask some of those questions toward the end of the night. This interview will probably be about 30 or 45 minutes. We'll be together from about 6:15 to about 7:30, but the interview will probably be about 30 minutes, and we'll leave some time for questions. I thank you for being a part of our Truth Talk tonight. Thank you for joining us for midweek. I think this will be beneficial for you and your family. So I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dan and let him introduce our guest and begin our conversation about mental health and the Bible, and mental health and the gospel. So pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight just thanking you for the opportunity that we have to meet together, both here on campus and through our online audience. And thank you for just this pause during our week to reorient our lives and our minds and our thoughts around you. And we thank you for this opportunity that we have tonight to dive into your word and hear about mental health from a gospel perspective. And we know that these are challenging times, both physically and spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And we feel like it's just a great opportunity for us tonight to be able to look at your word and just to reorient our hearts around what your word says about our mental health and our. I pray that you will just meet with us tonight, and I pray that you will just give us a great insight and clarity into your word and these biblical principles. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, we want to welcome everyone here to our Truth Talks tonight. It's good to be here. Those of you who are here, it's good to be actually here on campus in person after not meeting for several months. We're excited about meeting up again on Sunday. And those of you who are watching online, we want to welcome you as well. And we encourage you to participate. We'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So if you're here in the audience, you have a question, or if you're online, we welcome your questions as well. But I'm glad to have joining me today Alyssa Anderson, who is a marriage and family therapist in Cool Springs, and has a marriage and family therapy practice there and has been doing this for quite a while. And Alyssa, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we start with some of kind of questions we have about this important subject, maybe share a little bit about yourself and how you got into this and some of the work that you do.
Sure. Well, I love the Nashville community. I actually came here and as a college student went to Belmont University, graduated from there, and ended up working for several faith-based nonprofit organizations in the area for years, and then eventually went back to school and got my graduate degree and worked for Restore Ministries for about 7 years as their licensed marriage and family therapist. And then, when the economy kind of went through some struggles, then the YMCA, it was affiliated through the YMCA, and they had to close the counseling center. So I launched back out into private practice, which I've been doing for several years now, doing that. My husband and I have 2 teenagers ourselves, so I feel like I'm definitely walking the talk and living it real life in the real trenches with everyone. But it's definitely one of my favorite populations to work with. I just adore teenagers and emerging adults, college age. I just love that. It's a huge time of life. And if you can just have one person, sometimes outside of wonderful family and good church community, but sometimes you just need another person to kind of help you through that stuff. And it's such a privilege to be that person to many.
Yeah, that's great. It's such a great, the fact that you love working with teenagers and emerging adults is really great. So I want to just start off with the basic questions. How should Christians think about mental health? I think, sometimes you see kind of 2 approaches to it. Those of us who are pastors, we like to prioritize sometimes, most of the time, studying the Bible and prayer is a kind of answer to some of our challenges. And then you also have the kind of medical and scientific community that has, diagnosed a lot of these things in the mental health world. And so it seems sometimes those 2 things are pitted against each other. And help us as Christians think about that while we need both, while we need the Bible study and prayer and faith, but also there are times when we need some physical help with our, whether it's medicine or therapy, the physical side of things. So maybe explain those 2 things.
Absolutely. Addressing mental health as a Christian definitely does not have to be an either or, all or nothing scenario, for sure. There's oftentimes things in life are a both and that's kind of what I see this as. Like I am both a beloved child of God, and also I may have this challenge I'm dealing with regarding my mental health, and that can be true at the same time. I kind of think of it like, let's say you go to the doctor and you get diagnosed with diabetes. You wouldn't just write off your doctor's recommendations. Maybe your doctor said, hey, change your diet, increase your exercise, take insulin, things like that. We wouldn't just totally write that off. We would listen to that and do some of those things, but at the same time, we would probably be praying about that and going to our church community to continue to be, supported through that on how we're changing our life after a diagnosis like that. It's interesting how, I think the church has an amazing opportunity to be on the front lines in loving people and serving folks who struggle in all kinds of ways, not just, this area or this issue of mental health is no different, really. But I think it's interesting, and we'll talk a little bit later I'm sure, about stigma and stuff like that. But I think as we begin to look at how we can both address things, understanding them differently, like just as a medical perspective, like the example of diabetes, or without thinking like, we wouldn't think anything really of that. We would just think, okay, I'm going to take care of that, but I'm also going to, I don't have to trade. I can, merge my faith with maybe a doctor's advice.
Yeah, it seems sometimes we have a hard time thinking of ourselves as physical beings and also spiritual beings. What the body really says, we're body and spirit, right? I think, an example is I have to wear glasses because I have eye issues. And so the eye doctor, when I visit him, doesn't say to me, well, go study your Bible and pray more, which I do need to do that. But I need glasses or I can't drive home, right? So I think those two things seem to mix really well, and I think that's a really great perspective that you shared, that we're both. Sometimes I've heard people say too that, our brain is a physical thing. It's not just
It's an organ.
it's an organ, yeah. And so that
Body part.
that can break down and have issues like that too.
Well, and we are holistically made by God. We're a body, mind, and spirit, and so when it comes to mental health, we have to look at the biological factors, we have to look at the environmental factors, we have to look at how our own choices, affect things, we have to look at our emotions, all those things, and spiritually, all of that wraps up into how we address the things that we're dealing with.
I want to talk to some. I think there's less of this now than there used to be, but I think there still can be a bit of a stigma on a few different levels when it comes to mental health. I think on the one level, there still can be kind of a stigma of, I'm a good Christian. Why do I need to seek help for mental health? I'm a good Christian. Why should I seek help for depression or anxiety or some of these other challenges? Shouldn't I just have more faith? On the one hand, obviously, we may be telling that to ourselves, but there may be stigma in a Christian community. I also think there could be a stigma, and you can answer more about this, but just the idea that I don't want people to know that I'm not all put together. So you're embarrassed to go get help because you're supposed to feel like everything's okay.
Right.
And so maybe speak to those two realities.
Sure. I think this generation's definitely feeling a lot of pressure to perform and maybe to feel perfect, and then social media and things like that can intensify that if, we're all just trying to put our best out there, right? And that can present challenges for sure. One of the greatest challenges in dealing with mental health, the struggle with that is it can cause the person to change how they perceive themselves or how they believe other people perceive them. So, that definitely affects your identity and your self-esteem and things like that. I like to think of the example of like, if you see a friend who has a broken leg, people don't necessarily perceive that in some way that there's like something wrong with them or a threat to themselves or even an indictment of that person as a person. We just see like, hey, they broke their leg somehow and okay, So it's interesting that we have this idea that's different about it's the judgment that can creep in sometimes with, this idea of blame or fault sort of being placed on a person, like, what are they doing wrong or what aren't they doing right or something like that. And sometimes it's really not about any of that. It's just a struggle they're dealing with. That just, like we said, it's a body part. Something needs some help. So I kind of think of that example. It helps me to change my perspective about it instead of, especially when it comes to that stigma.
It does seem like, whether it's ourselves needing to go get some help for depression or for anxiety or for some other issues, but also it seems like there's like another level that I have to admit to myself that maybe something's not quite right, and I'm now one of those people who has to do this.
Which, newsflash, we're all one of those people. Everybody's one of those people. So hey, great, we all get a ticket to the club. We're all in. It's great. We're all VIP in that club because every single person has a problem, has problems, has mess, has struggles, has, So it's nice when we can just let that down and just be real.
That's really good. That's good reassurance for folks. And I think people need to hear it too from us pastors, right? That there's permission for you to not be okay and to get help, right? I think. So I want to change gears a little bit. We've all been cooped up, quarantined for almost 3 months, and this might be the second or third time I've worn a collared shirt in 3 months. Daryl would not let me wear sweatpants here tonight. He's funny that way. So we've all been cooped up and isolated. That can have an impact on our mental health too, can it not?
Absolutely.
Regardless if you're an extreme extrovert like me, who loves people and gets energized, or if you're an introvert, for all of us, that isolation long term can't be great for our mental health. So maybe help us think through as we're emerging out of this, how to be helping ourselves that way, and how to cope in this kind of new as we kind of slowly emerge.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys experienced this, but I noticed in our home with my teenagers, I think, and also with the folks that I work with, I think that at first when quarantine first started, kids seemed to be coping overall okay because, and the kids will know what this means, but there wasn't any FOMO, which is fear of missing out. Nobody was doing anything. So it wasn't like you were watching other people on, Instagram having fun. Everybody was chilling. So I think it kind of just let everybody relax for a minute and just sort of regroup and figure out, okay, this is weird, and what are we doing, and how are we going to move forward from here? But then, any amount, like a couple months of that's a long time. And I think prolonged isolation and living with the unknowns can take a toll on anyone. Teenagers need connection. They need quality time and interaction with their peers. Social media screens, all that can only do so much. It can only offer so far, with that. And then, then it can also work against us, as we understand, because it's just not a replacement for real three-dimensional connection with your friends and with people. So I think what I'm noticing is now that some things are changing and some things are starting back, some sports, some youth groups, some things like that, I'm noticing that people are, obviously cautiously and safely beginning to kind of come back out and emerge and reconnect with their friends and process really what they've been through. The weirdness of it, the losses that many have gone through, missing out on ceremonies and parties and, ending their seasons strangely banned and sports and all those things. It's weird. It was hard. And so I think they're just kind of now starting to process all of that. But at least being able to do it together, I think, is helpful. It's great to have family, but it's also really great to have friends who you can talk and they get it because they're in your world with you in that level.
It does seem too, when you mentioned about the loss of like ceremonies, graduations, and proms, and sporting events and seasons lost, there can be a sense in which we feel feeling bad about that, about
First world problems.
Yeah,
like we're not allowed to grieve that. Yeah.
Right. We don't. Doesn't feel right to mourn the loss of things. So maybe talk to us about that. Is that a process people have to go through sometimes in order to mourn what's been lost?
It's important. So our story is our story, and we don't. It's if we're looking to the left or right of us, there's always going to be someone that's doing better and someone that's doing worse, and so that's why we just want to steer clear of that and not compare, and just kind of stay in our lane and know that hey, this is what I've been through, and it's good to share. Like I said, it's good to have friends and people that you can share that with that help bring some comfort and identifying with that experience. But the truth is, it's okay for us to grieve the losses that we've experienced. The seniors and the 8th graders and the 5th graders and all the kids that, lost out on those rites of passage and those, and just, like I said, seasons of sports, seasons of band. Some people had family that were sick. Some people had losses in their family, of greater magnitude. So I know that, but we don't have to compare all of that to each other. We just have to give ourselves permission to feel sad if we're sad, to feel angry if we're angry, to feel cranky when we're cranky, and to be happy and glad about the things that we get to feel that about. So it is odd, and I think sometimes we just have to tell the truth about that it's been a weird time, right, y'all? Weird, really weird.
It has been a weird time. We're talking to an audience primarily of parents and of teens and teenagers, and so the teenage years can be fun years, but also difficult years as the body's changing, and you've got peer pressure and peers, and you got parents that you're dealing with, that are hard to deal with. Sometimes I can't imagine that, but occasionally I hear that. Parents can be hard to deal with. Teens can also suffer with mental health issues. Maybe don't know how to express it or who to talk to. Maybe they're embarrassed to talk to somebody about it. So if you're talking to teens during these years, what is some advice you would give them, and maybe some tools to help them cope during this time?
Well, I actually made some notes about this question because I feel like it's so important. And I would say the first thing is don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. It's okay to ask for help when we need it. Ask the right people. Maybe find a trusted adult, your youth pastor or your dad or mom or whomever. Like, go to somebody who you can, because friends are awesome and they can listen, but they can't really help you fix your problems, right? Because they're like in it with you, right there. But don't be afraid to ask for help and just find the right person and be persistent. Like, if you don't feel like you found the right answer the first time, then try again, until you're heard. And the second thing is so important to remember, this is not permanent. This is not permanent. There really is life after middle school and high school, and it's actually kind of pretty awesome. It's really pretty cool. And all those hormones are so much better, and so many problems. It's like, whew, I'm so glad. I mean, we've earned it, But that's the thing, is it feels so real in the moment, and it is. It just can feel like forever when you're in it, and it just feels so permanent. And it's just really sometimes the hope of knowing you'll get past it. And then the next thing is just to you need to know you can do hard things. You can do it. You really have what it takes. This generation's actually so much more resilient than people give them credit for. They're smart, they're strong. I love them. I'm so proud to watch, the kids that are coming up and in this day and age. You will learn what you need to through the process to be the person that God made you to be, but you don't have to have it all figured out right now. So it's just trust God and trust the process.
That's a good word. What word would you give to people who, teens particularly, that might feel alone or lonely, that maybe there's friends, maybe there's not friends, maybe there's a hard time making friends, but kind of down deep they feel like, okay, I don't have does anybody see me? Does anybody care? What is a word you give in that moment?
Yeah. It's this. Oh, there's just so much pressure to feel like you have to be a certain kind of way or look a certain kind of way, and it can be so easy to get caught up in that. Even for adults, really easy to get caught up in that trap. I would just say, just have courage and persistence is hard when you're tired, and weary and you don't feel seen or heard. But just don't give up until you find your tribe, because they're out there. It may take a little bit of effort. It may take a little time to try to find the people that really do love and value you for who you are, but you can find them and they're out there. Because the truth is, everybody has insecurity. Everybody's feeling that pressure, and we're all just kind of faking it till we make it sometimes. And when you kind of know that, you see inside the curtain, and you're not on the outside, you realize, hey, maybe I'm not as different as I think I am, or I'm not as, and I think that's just something we really need to understand, that everybody feels insecure, and lots of people are feeling anxious, and you're not as different as you might feel. And so just keep reaching out until you find the people that you click with, because they're out there.
So talk to us parents. So we've talked to teens a little bit, but parents, what are some tools for parents of teens to help our teens through these fun years, but can also be difficult years? What are some things we can and should be doing?
So I think there's, it's so simple, but we forget it sometimes, that there's just so much power in just learning to listen, to be available without necessarily feeling like we have to push our kids to talk, if that's not what they need or want at that moment. Just being available and just being willing to listen. Loving parents want to do a lot to help their kids, and sometimes we forget that they're really capable, even when they're struggling, but that struggling is part of growth, right? That if we want them to become the people that we, like the strong and resilient and confident people that we know they can grow into, we have to give them an opportunity to do that. And sometimes that involves some discomfort and some struggle. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, y'all, because it is not easy for me to do either. Like, I do not like to see my kids, it's not fun to watch your kids struggle or suffer. But sometimes that's what I know they need to grow. And when they've got it, when they've accomplished something, or when they've done it on their own, or maybe even failed, but then tried again and then succeeded, they feel good about themselves, and it helps them to believe that they can do it. They can do the hard things, and we kind of get out of the way of that and let them do for themselves what they can or should. Now, obviously, that changes over time, right? Because what a person can do when they're 5 versus 15 versus 25 is going to be very different. And so we have to give them opportunity to do that, and just be present and to be available, and to let them know, like, hey, we are your biggest fan. Like, I am cheering you on so hardcore here, but I'm not going to do for you. I'm going to let you figure it out, like a little, like let you struggle a little to see you accomplish that, and then we're all going to celebrate when you do.
So I have one or two more questions, then we'll open it up to the floor if anybody wants to ask a question, or from questions that may come in online. What are some tools you can give to parents and teens as we work on a relationship? Relationships can have some conflict during these times, or so I've heard, between parents and teens.
Yeah.
And so give us some tools as we navigate the conflict that inevitably occurs in the teen years.
Well, one thing that can happen is you can feel like you end up in a position of you're almost, you don't realize it, but you kind of end up in this position where you feel like you're against each other. And that's really doesn't have to be true. And sometimes it's not true, but it's what you feel. Like, you feel like all of a sudden you're butting heads, or like you're the enemies or something. And it, sometimes it just helps to kind of stop and breathe and look at the situation and regroup and kind of reposition yourself, and realize, wait a minute, I'm not against you. I'm trying to help you. And what am I missing here? And, sometimes we're just in the thick of it, right? And so we just need to sometimes pause and regroup and realize, like, how we can support and be an advocate, and not realize that we're not their enemy. We're not trying to be against them. And for them to remember that too, that rules and boundaries and all those things are not meant to be against them. It's just to set them up for success, to be able to become the person that they want to be and we want them to become.
That's a good word. Any questions for Alyssa out there? I have a couple myself, but I wanted to open up and see if anybody has a question. Church life is typically that nobody has a question in the beginning and then everyone has one at the end. But the question back there. I'll repeat the question. Stand by. Let me ask a question while he gets a mic. So one more question I was thinking of while we were talking. What's some advice you give for teens in this season to develop good spiritual practices? We're as parents, we're always kind of bugging our kids. Are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? Are you, we're taking them to church and stuff. But developing those habits and practices, what's some advice you give both to teens and actually parents to help nurture that?
Yeah, don't think you have to have your faith all figured out right now. I mean, it's an evolving thing too. Just like everything else in life, you're growing into your maturity and wisdom, and that takes time. And so I think this idea that somehow we have to have it all figured out, it kind of goes across the board, right? Even spiritually and even with our faith. Don't feel like you can't ask hard questions or talk about things and wrestle with these things. Like, that's learning to take it on for yourself and it to be personal, like your own faith. That's a part of that process, I think. And have community, because you can't do it alone. You need to be in community. You need to stay, with people like that have your back and can support good choices in your life. You get picked off when you're out on your own, and isolated, and also, you kind of are the company you keep. So you got to remember that you want to be with people who have the same goals in life as you do, and keep their eye like forward, and want to be, want to make good choices, and to stay strong and not get caught up in junk that derails you. I think those are important.
That's a good word. Are we ready back there?
Yes, I think that online you'll be able to hear me but not see me, and I will, oh, there we go. I will work the audience here, and you'll be able to see us a little bit and hear us as well, it looks like. And we'll take some questions from the audience and also from online as well.
It's kind of like the Price is Right.
So, as a father of two girls, one's 25, one's 15, so kind of
Congratulations.
One went through the teenage years, one's right in the middle of it. And then I also, in the past, have worked with the youth group and the boys. And masculinity in today's society is so frowned upon. But to me, I feel like masculinity is biblical. You should be the leader of your family, of your faith family. But again, I know the Bible doesn't say be, big, burly, masculine, but understanding that and being that leader. And how do you as a counselor see that in today's society? How do you counsel, that masculinity isn't a bad thing, but what is the right way to be masculine in the godly fashion?
Ooh, do we have enough time for that question? I don't think we do. I will say that probably the approach that I take is, especially with younger people, I'm just trying to help them become comfortable in their own skin, that's a hard enough job. It's just to figure out, who did God make me to be, and how can I feel confident about that? That's a process. And so there's so many labels in life. There's a lot of stereotypes. It's easy to get caught up in that stuff. Both sides, for male and female. And I think, so I guess I would probably just approach it like trying to connect with them as a person, and kind of helping them figure out like how to really become comfortable with who they are. Does that make sense? I hope that answers that question. But because it's just so easy to get stuck in the labeling and yeah. And I just want them to be able to feel like they can be confident. Hey, if you're a sensitive guy, be a sensitive guy. Like if you're a strong guy, if you be a strong guy. If you like these things, these hobbies or whatever, go do that and enjoy it. But if you don't, that's okay. It doesn't define you. So I think we can just get stuck with that stuff. And so I'm more just to want to kind of let that person become who they're meant to be.
It does seem like there can be a kind of extremes, right? Where there's on the one hand, a kind of a, Braveheart masculinity, and on the other hand, a kind of passivity where, guys are just not kind of stepping up and doing, and be to the way that they need to. So it seems like there's a middle ground there to, where.
Which is just becoming comfortable with how God made you, and if you're a guy or a girl that, whatever way you were made, like if I'm a pretty independent woman, but I can be comfortable with that. Like I love my husband and I love being a mom, and like it doesn't, it's like I don't have to let stereotypes define me. I just had to like be okay with like what's the path I'm on and what's God calling me to, and I'm going to try to walk in that the best I can.
That's good. That's good. Another question?
I'll do one from our online audience, and if you are here on campus and you'd like to ask a question, just wave to me and I'll come get you while she is answering this question. But one of the questions online is this: what are some resources for our parents, both locally and then maybe some other resources that you could speak into from books or things that are online that our parents could be educating themselves in, or some resources as our parents are walking through these years with their teenagers?
I would have to answer that question in that I feel like I could get that information. I could pass it to Dan and he could provide it. Would that be fair? Just because there's so much. Like I'd like to be able to be more thoughtful about that, to kind of provide some good books or possibly even some cool podcasts or things, And I think if that was all put together and then he could just give it out, maybe that would help better.
That's great,
good.
and we will make those things available through our comments and also through our website. If those that are listening online would like to have those, or any of our parents that are a part of our Next Gen ministry would like to have those as well. Anybody on the floor else have a question? I'll ask another from our online audience while you guys are thinking up a good question. Don't leave me hanging here. All right. Here's another one. You kind of spoke to students during these teenage years and the hard times that this is, but could you maybe speak to parents just for a moment that are walking this with their kids, that maybe feel like they're just holding on by a thread tonight, and just kind of speak into them? We know these are challenging times raising teenagers, and a lot of times the teenagers get the focus when the parents are barely hanging on themselves. So could you just speak into them for tonight as well?
Absolutely. It has been a hard time on everyone, and there's just a collective fatigue, I think, that we're feeling, and still so many unknowns, right? And that's what makes it hard. You're just trying to figure out. We do better when we can have a plan, right? Or we kind of know what to predict, and so when things get off like that, it definitely rattles us. But I would just say to parents, like, your kids really are more resilient and capable than you know. So it's kind of back to what I was saying before about just everybody just breathe, don't be afraid to rest. One thing that I've heard a lot of feedback about this kind of sheltering in place, experience that we've had is just the pause that it gave our world, and some of the good things that came out of that. Just spending time together doing things that we never had time for before, not having the grind, the schedule that we all keep and that our kids keep, and even when we're not doing, even we're just doing a sport or something in art or one thing, working one job or whatever, it's just a lot that they're keeping up with on top of school and everything else. So that's one thing that I've heard a lot of feedback about, just gratitude that people have had over just, even though it did, for parents, it did change things and make it hard to figure out how to work from home, and the economic hit and some things that people are very real, that they're dealing with. But the flip side is just kind of forcing everything to stop kind of gave us a chance to reassess our priorities in a way, kind of figure out, like, is this the way I want to move forward? How do I want life to look? Teenagers are getting a lot more sleep now. Like, we know that that's that is its own global pandemic, is that teenagers do not get enough sleep in general. And so that's something that some people have noted and talked about, that that affects mental health. Not getting enough rest just sets you up already for distress, right? So that's interesting to see that benefit. But I would just say, don't be afraid to change how things look for you and your family moving forward. Don't think you have to just jump back into, like, whatever was before, that it has to look the same. Like, it's okay if it looks a little different, and maybe there'll be some good things that come out of that you'll all really like.
That's a good word, and I'm glad you mentioned sleep, because I've learned not to shame teenagers when they need to sleep in, because teenagers need sleep. I wanted to ask kind of a follow-up to that question. What are some good habits for teenagers, and physical habits to help them with their mental health? You mentioned sleep, but what are some other good habits?
Yeah, so you might have heard the term executive function. It's the big fancy term for just like how teenagers are learning how to manage their life. And they're literally in process of learning how to do it. Like, we know how to do it because we learned, right? Or some of us didn't, but we figured it out. We figured out a way that works for us, and we're responsible for it, so it is what it is. But they're learning how to manage their life. And so, again, it sounds so simple, but you need to eat right. You need to rest. You need to be okay to say no when you need to. Like, it is actually not a dirty word. It is okay to say no when you need to, and to say yes when you want to. Like, it's okay to do that. That's boundaries, and they're okay. They're good for you. And staying connected in real life with people that care about you is so helpful and healthy. Don't be, take breaks from screens. Ooh, I know that's not a fun, popular thing, but
that was my next question.
Just take breaks. Just take healthy breaks. Like, just take healthy breaks so that your brain can breathe and that your eyes can relax, and so that you can remember what it's like to connect with people that are like in front of you, not, in front of you.
I got another question, but I don't know if you had one.
I do have another from our online audience. If you, let me look right here. It is talking about the importance of biblical community and for your faith family in both for the teenager and also for the parent during this season as well. Could you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, just the importance of it. Yeah, it is important. The end. No, I'm just kidding.
We're for it.
Yeah, I'm just messing. It is important. I'm huge on community, like I said, and it's hard. I get it that sometimes you're trying to find your community, like you're trying to find even within church. You're trying to figure out where your people are, like where can be my good friends. It doesn't have to be quantity; it just needs to be quality. Like you just need just a few good people in your life that get you, and that's it. That can really make the difference. And you might have to persevere to find them. And so, yeah, I would just say yes. It's very important. You're gonna feel more loved and valued if you're known. You're gonna practice how to do relationship, and that's only gonna benefit you as you grow. And you're gonna learn how to take risks and let your guard down, and sometimes and learn how to deal with conflict, and learn how to deal with when you get your feelings hurt or you are in a fight with a friend or whatever. You got to stay in relationship in order to learn how to work through those things, and you'll feel better about yourself as you do. So, yeah.
I wanted to ask about, you mentioned about screen time, but I do know that some teens face like bullying, whether it's in person or cyberbullying. So speak to that. If a teenager is being bullied, how do you help them through that, whether it's cyberbullying or in person?
You guys have probably also heard the phrase, if you see something, say something. And I think that, so two parts. One is, if somebody's doing that to you, go tell somebody. Tell somebody. Just tell somebody, and then we'll figure it out. They will help you figure out what to do. You don't have to know what to do. You just got to tell somebody to help you figure it out. And if you see it happening, you say something. We have to have courage in this world. We know some of the things. There's a lot that's very confusing, but there are some things that are black and white that we know are just right or wrong. And if you see that happening, speak up. Even if it's you going and getting help. You go find somebody to get help and say, hey, I saw this. I feel scared or nervous. I don't really know what to do. It's awkward. And let them help you figure it out. So, just don't be afraid to say something and to reach out and get help to know how to handle it.
Question back there?
Yeah, we got one right back here.
All right, so most of what you said is really good for people that don't understand their depression so far and are still new to understanding what it is, and some people still haven't talked to people about it. But for the people that, because I've dealt with depression for years and everything, I've tried smaller friend groups, focusing on myself, taking a step back from screen time, all of that. What would you say that it'd be better for like a medical answer to try and help those kind of people? Because even reading the Bible, saying trying to use faith and trying to be with people that love you and everything, all of that. What do the people do that all of that doesn't work?
So for people that deal with like long-term depression, so depression, like everybody feels blue, like everybody feels sad, like people go through hard times, we go through struggles. Depression, when it's clinical or diagnosed, or that's usually when it's chronic or long-term. They have like long bouts of it with shorter periods of time where they feel like they're not living in that state. And yeah, I think you need a combination. I think you need a combination of support. You might need to seek professional help. You might need to see a doctor and talk about what your options are. Definitely get support from friends and family and others. Definitely pray. And all of that has to work together. But also knowing that sometimes it feels like it gets worse before it gets better. And I think that's when I was talking before about it's not like this is not permanent. That's what I'm talking about too, is when you're in adolescence, everything's magnified, right? Like the problems are even bigger. Like they feel the emotions that are attached to them oftentimes can feel so much bigger and more intense. And so knowing that there can be life on the other side of that that it can get better. A lot of adults will have stories we'll share, like I had a real struggle with depression when I was younger, and it took time, and I had to do all those things we just talked about to address it, but it got better, and sometimes I still deal with it, and that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to define you. You don't have to live under that label, but you also can be honest about it, and you don't have to feel shame about that, because that's part of the thing we were talking about, that sometimes we just have chemistry that's different, and so some of us just need to address that differently. No different than diabetes or heart disease or anything else that you might deal with that's biological, like that's in your body.
That's a great question and great answer.
That's a great question.
And I think I also hear you saying too that there's no stigma if you're at a place where maybe medicine might help you, along with all the other tools,
It's like insulin for diabetes. You take it, it helps because your body's not producing it the way that it was supposed to, right? And so some people deal with that in other chemical areas, and they might need it. But it's good to go ahead and look at all those options, and you don't have to jump toward any one, but it's okay to just kind of see it all out and just kind of figure out what's best for you.
Yeah, that's a good word.
So I'm not a parent, but I am a teacher and a coach, and I work in student ministry a lot. And a lot of things I hear is, well, I'm struggling with anxiety, I'm struggling with depression, but I don't want to tell my parents. And so how do we normalize the conversation on the parent side of things and on the student side of things who say, I have this trauma in my life and I haven't told my parents about it, or my parents won't listen to me, they just think I'm struggling, or they just think that I'm ignoring things, or they just think I'm sad, or they just think I'm whatever. How do we normalize the conversation and build a bridge between the two?
Well, first of all, thank you for being you, for doing what you do. And I would say, yes, all those things can be real. And sometimes kids don't tell because telling makes it real or more real. Sometimes kids don't say because they feel like they're going to let their parents down, or their parents are going to be disappointed or upset with them if they know they're struggling with that thing or whatever. Whether that's real or perceived, they might fear that. Sometimes they have tried to talk about it and it hasn't felt like it was received. So I get that. And, the most courageous thing we can ever do is just to keep trying to show up in this life, just one day at a time, keep showing up, because you know what? You have survived 100% of your bad days up till now, haven't you? If you're here, if you're in this room, or if you're hearing this, that means you've survived 100% of your worst days. So that means you can keep doing that. And so I just think that we forget that sometimes. Like, we think we can't do it, or we think that we start feeling, maybe hopeless. Or so if you've tried to talk to your parents about it, try again. If you're afraid to talk to your parents about it, try and see. Like, maybe you'll be surprised. Maybe they'll respond differently than you fear. If you need other people, talk to teachers or youth leaders or coaches or pastors, or just keep trying until you feel like you're able to find an answer, a solution that helps you out, helps you through it.
That's a great answer. One more.
Hi. So I think as teenagers, we have just a lot of things that we do, and we have school, and we have sports, and we have other activities, and we have our friends, and then we have things that we're struggling with. And
I'm exhausted already.
It can get really overwhelming. And so what are some ways that you would say are a way to just not be as stressed and not be as overwhelmed with all of the things we have going on?
So earlier I had sort of mentioned that it's okay to say no when you need to. And so this machine that we're all in, it's like the lie that's attached to it is if you say no to something or give up something or change or direction, that somehow you're going to get chucked off and like you'll never get back, and that's just not true. It's okay sometimes to pivot or to take a break or pause. It's okay to not take every AP class or try every single sport or thing you're good at, or even take a break from the things you're good at or that you love. Like sometimes it's okay to just take a break from that. It might make you better when you go back. This is just these fears that everything feels so all or nothing, right? That sometimes we don't think there's anything in the middle, and there's so much in the middle. It may be a little messy sometimes, but that's okay. Like, I'll tell you, I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I fully own this. Like, I had to learn how to live in the messy middle, but it's kind of cool sometimes. Like, honestly, it's relieving, and like, I don't know, I always, like I said, I always get through it. Even the messiest, worst days, like I've survived them, so you can too.
It's a good answer. And adults still have a hard time saying no.
Amen.
So I think we got one more question in the back.
This will be our last question here.
Okay, so when you have a friend who doesn't necessarily have the best like personality traits, where's the line that you draw between like helping them out with their struggles and like having to step back because they're pulling you down?
So personality traits or behaviors, because, behaviors,
Behavior.
right? So it's an important distinction, because sometimes if we don't recognize that's a behavior, then sometimes we're taking more ownership because we feel sorry for them or whatever we're thinking about it. There's an old counseling saying that never do for somebody what they can or should do for themselves. Ooh, that's a loaded statement, but there's a lot there that if you really try that, just every now and then just try that and see what happens. They might not like it at first, but it could be really good for them. I tell a story about, so my kids are I describe them as one is asked for permission and the other's asked for forgiveness. Like that's just how they're wired. And one just struggled like when they were little to tie their shoe, and the other, man, she like taught herself to ride a bike, tie her shoe. Like, I'm just glad to be here. I'm just like, I'm a witness. That's really what I'm doing, And so having one of each and just how different they are, it's really taught me a lot about how to navigate that, how to like not do for one what they can or should be able to do for themselves, and how that changes over time. But we even do that in friendships, right? Like we just get caught up in thinking that we have to do more for them, or that we have to stick it because like somehow it's mean to like give a boundary and say, hey, like I love you, but I can't solve that for you. Like you need to like figure that out. That can seem so strange to say that, but honestly, you're allowed to do that. And sometimes the best thing you could do for that person is not doing all that stuff for them.
That's a great word and a great way, I think, to end our time here. So, great questions, everybody, and great interaction. Would you give our guest, Alyssa Anderson, a round of applause? And thank her for being here. Why don't we close this time in prayer, and then Casey's going to come up and
Thank you
share
guys
some.
so much. It's a huge honor to be here.
Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful and thankful for this time together. We're grateful that we know that you are a good Father, that you are our Creator, that you, as the psalmist says, you remember our frame, and you know that we're dust. You know us in our weakest moments. You know how frail that we are, and you still love us, Lord. And I pray that this night would really help and bless everyone who's heard, Lord. And we pray that for those of us who struggle with mental health challenges, whether it's depression or anxiety or a range of things, Lord, that people who suffer would sense your presence among them and sense that you are a good Father. Pray that we would come alongside those who suffer and help them as well. Lord, bless this time together. Bless our church and our young people. Lord, I pray that you would just really work in their lives and help them navigate through this season of life, and as you have a great plan for their lives beyond what we can even see today. Lord, in your name we pray. Amen.
What great content that we've heard tonight, and such insightful questions from our audience. If you're here on campus tonight, Alyssa will be down front, and if there was a question that maybe you didn't want to ask with the mic. She would be able to help you with any of those questions tonight. If you're a part of our online audience tonight and something that Alyssa talked about tonight really resonated with you and you need to speak to someone, please reach out through the comments from the live stream tonight, or call the church office, or use the Connect card that is at greenhillchurch.com, and we would love to come alongside you as pastors and as staff to be able to help you and get you in contact, or be able to pray with you, or to be able to minister to you in your life and serve you during this time. Just as a few housekeeping things, I just want to remind you about this Sunday. This Sunday, we will be live on campus in the building for the first time, and so we're super excited about that. We will have services both at 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. There'll be 2 service options, one in the sanctuary and one in the fellowship hall at 9, and then the same thing at 11 o'clock. And so we're asking our folks to register. And you can register online at greenhillchurch.com. Please go and do that for us. That helps us to know how to serve you, to be prepared for you, and to be able to minister to you in our church family in the most appropriate way. And so please go online and register either for that 9 o'clock service or that 11 o'clock service in the fellowship hall or in the sanctuary. Also, we have some resources to give you to be able to help invite our community to Green Hill Church, and those are some yard signs that we have that celebrate Together Again. And so if you haven't gotten your yard sign to put out in front of your house, please come by and get those during the church office hours, or if you're here with us tonight, you can take one of those home. We have some of those in the hallway. We also have some door hangers that celebrate coming back together again, and give some information about the church. And we're just really asking our people to be intentional about their neighbors and intentional in their community, and take some of those door hangers and put those on the doors that are around you in your neighborhood. We put them together in groups of 10, and so we feel like that's something that we could ask everyone to do. If you'd like to have more than 10, feel free to take those with you tonight. We're super excited about being back in the building together and worshiping live together on Sunday. Thank you for joining us for midweek. Thank you for joining us on our live stream. We love you and can't wait to see you. Have a good night.